In America's Gilded Age, power was measured not just in fortunes amassed, but in monuments built to defy anyone who dared question your place. The Vanderbilts transformed raw railroad wealth into a legacy no aristocrat could ignore. They did this by creating a mansion larger than the White House and more extravagant than Versailles. Its 250 rooms and 125,000 acres were more than walls and land. This was not a home. This was a declaration of unchallenged dominion. But could architecture truly rewrite social order, or would the world around it simply move on? To answer, we must return to the beginning, when Cornelius Vanderbilt turned fairies into an empire and a family into America's untouchable dynasty. Cornelius Vanderbilt was born in 1794 on Staten Island, the son of a ferryman. By the age of 16, he had launched his own boat service across New York Harbor, shuttling passengers and goods for a modest fee. What began as a single periauger soon multiplied into a fleet as he mastered the tides, outpaced rivals, and learned the value of speed and reliability. The Commodore, as he came to be known, had an instinct for opportunity. When the age of steam arrived, he was among the first to invest, buying his own steam ferry and challenging established monopolies on the Hudson River. Court battles and fare wars followed, but Vanderbilt's determination proved relentless. By the 1830s, his steamships dominated routes from New York to New England, and by the 1850s, he was sending vessels to California and Europe, undercutting prices and amassing a fortune that dwarfed his early beginnings. Steam changed everything. The next leap came with railroads. In 1857, Vanderbilt acquired the New York and Harlem Railroad, and then expanded his reach through a series of calculated takeovers. By the time of his death in 1877, he controlled a rail network stretching from Manhattan to Chicago, and his personal wealth was estimated at over $100 million, a sum almost unimaginable at the time. Wealth on that scale rewrote the rules. This was not inherited privilege, but the product of a single-minded pursuit of dominance in America's arteries of movement. Cornelius Vanderbilt's empire was built on motion, but his legacy would soon demand something more permanent, a monument to ensure the family's place was never questioned again. William Henry Vanderbilt inherited not only the largest fortune in America, but also the burden of its perception. By the 1880s, the Vanderbilt name was synonymous with staggering sums. Rail profits pooled into bank vaults, real estate, and stocks. Yet in the drawing rooms of Manhattan, old families drew sharp lines. Money alone, they insisted, could not buy a seat at their tables. The Astors, the Stuyvesants, the Livingstons, these were names woven into the city's founding. The Vanderbilts, despite their wealth, were still newcomers. William Henry's assets surpassed $200 million by 1885, an amount that eclipsed the budgets of entire states. But social acceptance proved elusive. Invitations to the most exclusive balls remained rare. Stories circulated of doors quietly closed to railroad money, of whispers about origins too recent, fortunes too vast. The so-called 400, led by Mrs. Caroline Astor and her circle, acted as gatekeepers. They measured lineage in generations, not dollars. For the Vanderbilts, this was more than a slight. It was a public challenge. William Henry could buy railroads and shape cities, but he could not command respect in the salons of Fifth Avenue. The family's response would not be a plea for approval. It would be a demonstration, one that would use architecture, scale, and spectacle to force recognition. The stage was set for a statement that could not be ignored. In the spring of 1888, George Washington Vanderbilt II arrived in the hills just outside Asheville, North Carolina. The land he surveyed was wild and uneven, dotted with worn-out farms and tangled forests. Over the next few years, he quietly acquired nearly 700 separate parcels, fields, woodlots, even forgotten graveyards, until his holdings stretched across approximately 125,000 acres. This was not a gentleman's country retreat. It was a domain larger than some European principalities, a canvas vast enough to realize a vision that defied the limits of American ambition. George's idea was as audacious as his family's fortune. He would create a private estate modeled on the great chateau of the Loire Valley, a place where art, science, and nature would be woven together. For guidance, he turned to two men at the height of their disciplines. Richard Morris Hunt, the nation's most celebrated architect, had studied the French Renaissance firsthand. Frederick Law Olmsted, the designer of Central Park, understood how to transform raw landscape into cultivated grandeur. Together, they set out to build not just a house, but a living monument. The estate's name, Biltmore, blended Vanderbilt's Dutch ancestry with the rolling character of the land. Hunt's plans called for a chateau-esque residence with steeply pitched roofs, soaring turrets, and stonework that echoed the palaces of Blois and Chambord. Olmsted's vision was equally ambitious. He carved out 75 acres for formal gardens and conservatories, planned miles of carriage drives, and began the slow process of reforesting hillsides stripped bare by generations of logging. Biltmore was both an architectural program and a statement of intent. The scale of Biltmore was both literal and symbolic. Here the boundaries between nature and artifice dissolved. Every vista, every approach, was designed to impress upon visitors a sense of permanence and authority. Before a single stone was laid, the land itself had been transformed into a stage for spectacle. The sheer breadth of the estate announced a new standard for American wealth, a statement meant to be seen, remembered, and never rivaled. Biltmore stands as a feat of human ambition measured in stone, brick, and timber. The house alone covers 178,926 square feet, an expanse that dwarfs any private residence in the United States. Its facade stretches 780 feet, longer than 2 city blocks, a continuous sweep of limestone and carved ornament meant to overwhelm the eye. The sheer mass required over 11 million bricks, each one set by hand, forming walls that rise 4 stories above the ground and plunge deep into the earth. Inside, more than 250 rooms unfold in a labyrinth of galleries, salons, and private chambers. There are 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, and 65 fireplaces, all arranged with mathematical precision beneath steep slate roofs and medieval turrets. The main banquet hall soars 7 stories, crowned by a barrel-vaulted ceiling and flanked by a triple-arched window that frames the distant Blue Ridge. Richard Morris Hunt, the architect, recruited artisans from Europe to carve mantels, sculpt capitals, and lay parquet floors. The central staircase, a spiral of Indiana limestone, climbs 102 steps around a shaft lit by a chandelier with 72 bulbs. Even the stables attached to the house cover 12,000 square feet, larger than most New York mansions of the era. Every surface, every detail, was chosen for permanence. The stone was quarried from the estate itself, hauled by rail to the site. Oak and walnut were cut, seasoned, and fitted by teams of craftsmen whose skills echoed the guilds of the old world. Biltmore was not built for comfort alone. Its dimensions were meant to silence any question of legitimacy. In the language of architecture, it spoke in superlatives: largest, longest, most enduring. Here, the house itself became the dynasty's shield, scale made stone, ambition rendered permanent. Between 1889 and 1895, the construction of Biltmore demanded a financial commitment rarely seen in private hands. George Washington Vanderbilt II authorized payments that, by the time the house opened, totaled $5 million, an amount that would approach $189 million today. This was not a single sum, but a steady outflow, including wages for hundreds of laborers, contracts for artisans brought from Europe, and the purchase of materials on a scale more often reserved for civic monuments. Limestone was quarried and shaped on site, brick kilns fired day and night, and shipments of slate, glass, and timber arrived by rail from distant cities. The accounting ledgers swelled with entries, each one a line item in the creation of a world unto itself. Vanderbilt's willingness to spend at this level was itself a statement. At a time when the average American home cost less than $2,000, Biltmore's initial outlay dwarfed not only other houses, but even the budgets of many public buildings. The estate's price tag became part of its legend, a figure recited in newspapers and whispered in drawing rooms, proof that the family's resources were as inexhaustible as their ambition. To operate Biltmore was to maintain a small municipality under one roof. The payroll alone rivaled the annual budget of Asheville, employing more than 100 indoor staff and hundreds more across farms, gardens, and workshops. Maids, butlers, cooks, and footmen worked in shifts to keep the house running day and night, while outside teams of gardeners tended the formal grounds. and farmhands managed livestock and crops on thousands of acres. The estate's annual operating costs soared as high as $500,000, a sum that in the 1890s exceeded what many counties spent on schools, roads, and relief combined. Each month, wages were distributed in cash or scrip, supporting not just the workers, but their families in the surrounding village that had been constructed for their use. The absence of detailed ledgers and public records leaves only estimates. The scale is clear. Biltmore's ongoing expense was not a burden to be minimized, but a visible assertion of the family's ability to sustain a world of their own year after year. Order and hierarchy governed every moment within Biltmore's walls. More than 100 staff moved through the house each day, each role defined with precision. On the fourth floor, 21 bedrooms were reserved for female servants, maids, laundresses, and parlor maids, whose duties began before dawn and ended long after midnight. Male staff, including footmen, valets, and grooms, lived above the stables, their routines dictated by bells and the unspoken codes of service. At the heart of daily operations stood the butler, commanding a staff that rivaled the workforce of a small town. The housekeeper managed linens and order, overseeing a silent army that polished, dusted, and prepared each room for the family and their guests. In the kitchens below stairs, cooks and scullery maids worked beside pastry chefs, producing meals that reflected both French tradition and American abundance. 3 kitchens operated in concert, feeding not just the Vanderbilts, but also the constant flow of visitors, staff, and tradesmen. Technology shaped the rhythm of the house. Biltmore was among the first private residences in America to feature full electric lighting. The great spiral staircase, rising 4 stories, was illuminated by a chandelier fitted with 72 bulbs, a marvel in an era when most homes still relied on gas or candlelight. Hot and cold running water reached dozens of bathrooms, while a network of speaking tubes and electric call bells linked the farthest corners of the house to the servants' quarters. The scale of operations became most visible during grand events. On Christmas Eve, 1895, the house opened with a gala attended by family and friends from across the country. Every detail was orchestrated. Footmen in livery stationed at each entrance, tables set with imported china and silver, orchestras playing in the winter garden. Only the most select guests received invitations, their presence a measure of the family's social reach. Behind the scenes, staff worked in coordinated shifts, ensuring that each course, each fire, and each light was perfectly timed. Biltmore's internal machinery ran without pause, a living demonstration of wealth translated into order. Here, money did not simply build walls. It created a world where service, technology, and spectacle merged to support a single family's vision of permanence. In March 1914, George Washington Vanderbilt II died unexpectedly at the age of 51. The estate, once animated by his vision and resources, passed to his wife, Edith, and their daughter, Cornelia. The world beyond Biltmore's gates was changing. Wartime demands, new taxes, and the slow unwinding of the Gilded Age pressed hard against the foundations of even the grandest fortunes. Maintaining a private domain of such scale became ever more difficult. Over the following decades, parcels of land were sold, first by necessity, then by design. Forests that had once stretched unbroken to the horizon were ceded to the federal government, forming the core of what would become Pisgah National Forest. From its original 125,000 acres, the estate contracted to 8,000 acres, its boundaries now marked by stone walls and memory. Yet the house itself endured, its limestone walls resisting the passage of time. In the 1930s, as the Great Depression swept across the country, Edith Vanderbilt opened Biltmore's doors to the public. It was a gesture born of pragmatism and preservation, intended to generate income for upkeep and to secure the estate's survival. In 1956, the family formalized this transition and established Biltmore as a house museum. Visitors arrived in steady numbers, drawn by the promise of seeing a world that had once stood apart from their own. The transformation from private sanctuary to public monument did not erase Biltmore's original purpose. Its architecture, its gardens, and its scale remained as they were, unchanged and undiminished. The estate became a living archive, a place where the ambitions of a vanished era are preserved not in books or paintings, but in stone and space. Today, Biltmore stands as the largest privately owned house in America, a rare survivor among the ruins of Gilded Age grandeur. It is a reminder that while fortunes may fade and families disperse, some monuments to human ambition endure. The estate outlasted the world that built it, its presence a quiet assertion of permanence against the shifting tides of time. The Biltmore endures as the largest private home in America, a monument to the belief that architecture could secure a legacy beyond fortune. Today, its stone walls still command awe, and true untouchability has shifted from estates to forms of influence that are less visible. The lesson is clear. Power leaves its mark, but permanence is always an illusion. Thank you for joining us inside these storied halls.